species still alive, or was it wiped out in the incident?
No, it was very small monkeys. It was when in Africa, when we were loading the Brahman cattle, we used to take Brahman cattle from Lagos up to Takoradi in the Gold Coast, and they couldn't have cattle up there because they had tsetse fly. So they used to drive these Brahman cattle about 100 miles up to the docks, and then they'd put a roost round their neck, and about 3 or 4 of them just hooked on a hook and hooked up like that and brought on deck. Just the carpenter had one of these little monkeys. It was only about that size. And this carpenter had this monkey, and of course he used to sit in his shoulders just like a parrot, like, you know. And when these cattle were coming on board, I saw him, and he was so excited seeing all these cattle brought on board. You know, he thought, whoa, 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 and he's running up and down, so excited about it. But this little grass monkey, they call them, the small ones, it was forever teasing the cat, the ship's cat. And it was very, very fast. It would come up and tweak it was a game that he thought he was playing. But the cat actually caught him once. And it came to me with this little thing, and he had his thumb, he had that bit hanging off. They brought him to me because I was in charge of the medical locker, and I dealt with things medical as second officer. And so I had to get this thing and put it, clean it all and put it back on again. But it healed up all right. He actually got the thing off and he kept licking it, and it was, nature took its way. It was okay.
But there was another monkey story. There was an 80s monkey story he was asking about, was when did the ship hit the trees that knocked the monkey out of the trees?
Oh, well, when we went up the
Monkey
Creek, up the Benin River, it was very, very narrow. And at times we brushed the forest. It was just trees and the creek. And they used to fall off as we brushed past them. These monkeys used to fall on board, like, they'd be running around and have monkeys on board for a day or two. Yeah.
Oh. So I thought today you could perhaps give us some of your earliest memories of what it was like growing up when you were a little boy. And was that initially in Glasgow, or was it Kirkcaldy?
No. It was your grandpa was born in Kirkcaldy. I was born in Paisley, son.
All right.
And you can go on it. If you go onto Google, you can go to Paisley, go to Greenhill Road 94, and it will zoom down and it will show you where our house was. And because there's none there now. It's a football stadium or something, I think. But there was a rail track going down to the coast, down to Bishop and Port, Glasgow, Greenock and Gourock, and going down to the Clyde. And my earliest recollection is that my mother would, we had to be in bed by 10 o'clock. And my mother would say to me, come on, Bobby, get into bed, you've got to catch the Dream Train. And that was the train that left Paisley St. James, because that was the station beside us. It was no more than about 150 yards to the station. And these tank locomotives, the small ones, they ran down that line, you see. And when it took off, that was 7 o'clock. And I had to get on that so I'd get good dreams during the night.
So I thought you said you had to be in bed by 10.
7.
Oh, 7, I see.
7.
And what was your house like?
Pardon?
What was the house and the area you lived in like?
I've got a drawing to pass over to you because it was a flat, middle flat, 1 story up. Yeah. And it was 2 room, what they call 2 rooms and a kitchen. The kitchen was just a scullery, a place with a sink and a cooker, and that was all. And the 2 rooms, we only used one because we couldn't afford to heat the other one. The best room was kept for big events like Christmas and things like that. But the room would be about, I think it would be about 15 feet by 15 feet.
Right.
And that was kitchen, lounge, dining room. And in that room, there were 2 holes in the wall, we called them. That is recesses with a double bed and a cut and a cross.
Yeah.
So in one nearest the fire was my sister Betty and I. And then the other one facing the fire was my mother and father. So we're all in basically one room.
Yeah.
And it was in that room that I had tonsillitis, and the doctor came. He I had chloroform, and he got a cloth, poured some chloroform out and put it on my nose, and I went to sleep. And he took out my tonsils on the kitchen table, and my father nearly passed out when he pulled these things out and turned around and put them on the kitchen stove, the fire, to burn them. Yeah, but he'd been told that it was all precise in time, and my parents had some ice cream for me to take right after it to try and help stop the bleeding. Yeah, but my earliest recollection is when I was about 3.5, and in those days it was cobbled streets, and it was like pavers laid on sand and hammered down, and because most of the transport was horses and carts. The milkman had a 2-wheeled cart with a nice big racing type horse on it. You know, you could go the clappers. And it had a couple of big, what would you call them, milk churns on the end with taps. And they used to have delivery then by galvanized cans with caps. So you put out the one for yesterday, it was emptied and washed, and they brought up one and took one away, you see?
Yeah.
That was the milk. The other deliveries were by 4-wheeled carts, but these were solid wheels. And, you know, so, and the only motorized vehicle that came was a 3-wheeled one wheel in the front and 2 at the back, a motor vehicle, which came round with the batteries for the radio. They called them accumulators in those days. And again, that was done once a week, and they would come round and you would put out your old one, and they would replace it with a fully charged one, you see. And that was on the old Echo type, where you had, they made an awful noise as you tuned them, you know, made awful noises.
And what were toys like?
Pardon?
What were your toys like? What sort of games did you play when you were a little chap?
Oh, well, because there wasn't all that, we could use the road and so outside our house, we would play on the pavement and on the road if there was no traffic around, because there was very little. What came in was horse-drawn vehicles to Dobie's next door to us, the tobacco factory. And they were friendly with all the carters there. And they used to give us their old bits of candles out the lights, lantern lights. Yeah, so we would play peavers with chalk on the pavements, and you know, a sort of stone. You would hop along and knock it into the next block light and things like that. We had lots of games like that we used to play as children, and we were only about 250 yards from a huge playing field. It had been a racing race track, horse racing, but the rules were it wasn't big enough, so the council made it into a lovely park full of hockey, football, things, bowling green, tennis courts. And when the circus came annually, they used to go on to this big thing, you know. In the old days, we used to have circuses. They came to town, and the big, you know, they would have the elephants walking down from the big station where they get into with all the carts, you know, and things like that. There were lions and tigers and all sorts, and I've seen Wild Bill Hickok. Yeah. We used to look forward to that once a year. But my earliest was probably, I don't know if I told you about it, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, Grandpa Beaton, that's my mother's father, he retired when I was about 3.5. And he came round to my mum and said, did she want him to take me for a walk? So I was very keen to go with my grandfather for a walk. Have I told you this before?
No.
And I was 3.5, and he took me for a walk, and it was absolutely fantastic because as he walked around, he had stories for everything. He smoked a clay pipe, and you know, if he saw a tree stump with some hair on it, he said that's where the gnomes play around and so on. And he would show me a weasel's track and a fox's track and things, how they were different. And where there was a little pond, and he took off his shoes. He went in and got me some bulrushes, and we put them aside so that we'd pick them up when we came back. But the walk he took me was along to his friend, who was a signalman at the signal box, which was about, I don't know, it might have been about a mile or so away. And we went there, and it was an old friend of his, and we climbed up the stairs up onto the signal box, and he had a burner going with a can on it with tea that was always stewing, and they'd have a cup of tea and they'd smoke their pipes, and there would be a ding ding sound, and that was to tell him that there was a train coming up. So he would then pull the lever, and that would start the steam engine below that pulled the points and the signal. And then the train would go past, and he'd do that, and ding, ding, and that would tell him that he'd passed it through and it had gone. And so I was enthralled by this, you know, it was just so fantastic, you know, a big train going past, you know. And then we walked past. Unfortunately, when we got back, my mother was very, very angry with my grandfather because he shouldn't have taken me so long. I was only 3.5, but I enjoyed it really much. But I had little blisters on my heels, but I didn't really seem to notice it because it was such a lovely day. And, you know, I was upset with my mother that she was upset with her father because I'd enjoyed myself with him. He was always, you know, a really nice old man. Yeah.
Do you remember your grandmother? Do you remember?
My grandmother? Yeah, my maternal grandmother, yes. Yeah. I don't remember my paternal grandmother because she died in childbirth, son. It was a stillborn. And so my father lost his mother when he was only 16.
Okay.
And his father was a foreman moulder at John Brown Shipyard. And he used to walk from Paisley to his job and back. He wore a bowler hat. He was well paid, had a nice flat and everything. So he got in, when my dad's mother died, there was him and his young sister. And my grandfather got in a housekeeper, but eventually he married her. And my father didn't go on with his mother. the war had started, and he told lies about his age and joined the army. He joined the army in the Scottish Argyll and Southern Highlanders.
Yeah.
And he spent quite a bit of time in the First World War in the trenches. And my dad had huge pores on his back because they spent months just living in mud. But eventually they caught up with him that he was underage. And he was taken off frontline duties and put on looking after German prisoners of war. And he was posted to a place called Abbeville in France. It's on the English Channel. And I've got a picture which I can hand on to you, showing him and another standing with all these German prisoners that they would march down through the town and put on the boat to go across the Channel to England, to prison in England. So he finished the war in that. Yeah.
And what do you remember about your maternal grandmother?
My maternal grandmother, yeah, she was a lovely person. Yeah, I used to go in those days. Families. My mother was one of a family of 10. It would have been 11, but one died. So she had 2 brothers and 8 sisters. Well, 7 sisters. Well, she was the second eldest girl, so they lived in a 2-bedroom flat up the road. And my mother slept in a bed, top to tail. There was 4 in a bed. You know, so they had heads close together like that. That's how they lived.
Oh my goodness.
My mother was sent home from school in winter with no shoes on and the snow on the ground.
Yeah.
That's how poor they were.
They were, Paul. And did your father work at Doby's when you were living in Paisley?
Yes, when my earliest recollection, my father was by the time I was 3.5, he was a chauffeur at not a chauffeur, a driver for the tobacco company for delivering tobacco to shops. So he had a proper car, but he was an engineer, and that's what in the early days of cars, you had to be an engineer because you had to be able to fix it. You had to have the equipment and the stuff to run the car. Prior to that, after the war, when he came back from the 1918 war, he was what they call an interrupted apprenticeship scheme, which meant that the employers had to take him back and let him finish his time as an apprenticeship as an engineer. So my dad's the mechanical engineer, and he sought jobs all over the place. In the Depression, he went as far as Aberdeen, going all over trying to get a job. Eventually got a job back home in Paisley as a driver to a doctor. So he had a very nice car to look after, but the hours, the pay was very poor, and the hours were astronomical. He was out any hour that was needed. Plus trying to keep this car going. But he, as far as I can remember, my dad was going to night school studying for a BSc in engineering, and he used to go to night school 2 nights a week for years.
What was he like? What are your recollections of him? What was he like?
Oh, lovely, lovely. You know, I always look forward to my dad coming in, you know. But, yeah, and my mother, I had 2 lovely parents, you know, they really looked after us, did the very best they could for us because they'd been through depression. So they were making sure that we ate good food and had clothes. And although it meant my mother was working from about 6 o'clock in the morning, putting the fire on to get my dad ready for work. And she went to bed about 11 or something. You know, they worked very hard, knitting. Lots of our clothes were knitted. You know, it's.
Do you remember going out as a family ever at the weekend or on a holiday?
Yeah. Well, it was a Scottish Protestant place.
Yeah.
Nobody did work. You worked 5.5 days a week, Fridays and Saturdays through till midday, and that happened right the way through till 1958, 59, when they stopped doing Saturday work. But on Sunday, you must not work. No buses, no transport, nobody worked. So you walked everywhere, and you weren't allowed to whistle. That wasn't very nice. You couldn't work. You couldn't work. You could walk through your garden, but not heavy digging or anything. It wasn't allowed.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, and you know, we went to the morning meeting in the morning. And parents went to morning church. In the afternoon, we went to the Sunday school, and we'd go for a walk with parents. And we always, in those days, what families did is we would meet at my maternal grandfather and grandmother's house, and we'd meet all our cousins there, you know, and there. Yeah. So it was a lovely, happy, very supportive, you know, because when anyone, I can remember when Kathy was having a baby, we had Lily come and stay with us. And that's what happened. The family didn't have national insurance, but you had the family who always took care of things. When people got married and had a house, the whole family descended on a place, scrubbed it from top to bottom, painted it, decorated it, everything. They had a drink or something like that, and they'd have a bit of fun, and somebody would cook scones and cakes or something like that. But all the work got done by the whole family. Everyone always looks after, you know, members of the family.
Yeah. So I remember, was it Kathy and Ina? Was it?
Ina was the youngest.
Okay. So how many of Grandma's sisters lived near you? How many of her sisters?
They all lived near Paisley. They were just around the corner and just down the road. You know, they were all around us, just like we are here. You know, except for you, you're the one that's away. But they're all around. I mean, my grandmother's house, maternal and grandfather were only just round the corner on Clark Street. That was the next road, and they were only about 100 yards up there on the right. And my paternal grandfather and grandma, they were up about another 100 yards up on the left, and so on. It was all in the church. My paternal grandfather was an elder in the church, and his house, when he came out of his house, he walked straight over to his church, the front door. He was right opposite it. Yeah.
And of course, you used to be a singer at Paisley Cathedral?
No, Paisley Abbey.
Oh, right.
When I was 8, I was a probationer, and that lasted 3 months. And then I was in the choir. Paisley Abbey Boys Choir was a huge choir. There were 40 boys. I've got a photograph of us you can have. Yeah, we used to do major works there, you know, and broadcasts with the BBC Symphony Orchestra and so on. I eventually became head choir boy, and I used to get off school to do weddings because I'd sing solos for them, you know, and in those days, I used to get half a crown for that. That was 2 shillings and 6pence. That was a lot of money. That was a lot of money.
Yes. Well, I can remember when I was little, I only got 6pence a week.
Yeah. Oh, that
was a lot of money.
But we used to have a thing in Scotland. When people got married, as they come out of the church, you know, to go for the reception, as they come out, they would have confetti and what they call bowl money. Now, not B-O-W-E-L, B-O-W-L, bowl money. And they would throw this would be 3pence and 6pences and shillings. They used to throw these out the door. All right. As they went, and people were scrambling all over for it. Very dangerous, but yeah, it's funny. But Paisley was a very big, booming town, son, with a transport setup that couldn't be bettered. It really couldn't. We had although we were 7 miles from Glasgow, the Glasgow trams ran into Paisley and through to Elderslie. And they used to run about, every sort of 1 or 2 minutes, like electric trams. And then we had the local bus services about every 2 minutes. Nobody needed cars. We didn't have cars, but we had a fantastic transport service that, made it very, very easy if you wanted to go by that. But I mean, we didn't use that for going to school. We lived about a mile and a half, 2 miles. We just, from school, you would walk that. That's the primary school. And when we moved and I went up to the big school, that was about 3 miles. And we used to walk that there and back. That's what most people did. I had
was it a safe environment?
Pardon?
Was it a safe environment? I mean, was there a lot
Safe.
of crime?
Safe.
Basically, yeah. Safe.
Oh yeah, it was safe. It was a safe environment where we were, and we had a police system there. They were mainly big Highlanders. They were usually about 6 foot something, and they knew their patch and they kept everyone in place. If you were a cheeky youngster, you'd get a cuff in the back of the neck, and you'd let them, what was what very quickly. And they knew every miscreant in their patch.
And what was school like?
School? Well, I didn't have a good first year because it was a very bad teacher, a really bad teacher who screamed at us all the time and had people wetting the floor and, and quite honestly, I'd know things, but when she started shouting at us, I couldn't remember it. And she was a spinster, and I always remember she had big rings on and things like that, and lipstick and so on. So I've always had I felt I don't want to know people with big rings and because she was just horrid. People took their children away. And my parents complained to the local education authority about it. She was really horrid. But after the first year, I moved to the next one up, and she was just the opposite. She was really good, and we blossomed. And I was always up first or second or third. I did well at school. When it came to 11 plus, I got into the higher secondary school. But I had one thing. I had one teacher who, when I was 10, that was the beginning of the war. I had in the class a couple of guys who were always doing things like throwing pellets and ink pellets and things like that. And then, they were taking the mickey out of him. But because he couldn't, nobody owned up. They just said, all right, out that whole row, out here, and it's going to give us all the strap. But I had always had it dinned into me by my father. Stand up for what is right, but don't accept punishment if you haven't done the crime. So when he did this to me, I took off, ran out of the classroom and ran home. And this was in the morning. I couldn't have lunch because I didn't feel hungry. And my dad came. My dad used to walk home from Adobe's to the house, for lunch and then back again. And he said, that's all right. He said, I'll come with you back and we'll have a word with the headmaster. So, he came back with me, and I never had the punishment ever again. That teacher didn't do it again. It was, that was just a one-off, and he was a bit weak, and, they were taking the mickey out of them, but it wasn't me, and I wasn't going to take it.
And what did you, and was your, you had the time after school. What about weekends? Did you go away on your bikes, or did you just
I didn't have a bike early on. I didn't have a bike until I was up in, might have been about, I didn't have it at Green Hill Road, so it would be when I was about 9 or 10, son, I got my first bike. First and only bike. It didn't have gears or anything like that, but I was always on my bike.
Yes.
But when the war started, everyone was working. So my sister Betty was a volunteer, and I volunteered, and we became ERO messengers. That's Emergency Relief Organisation. What we did is we had an armband, and if communications were knocked out during a raid, an air raid, with the bombs coming down, our job was to go to the nearest first aid post, wardens, and be there and take instructions back to where they had to go, whether it was to the ambulance centre, to the police, or whatever. So we had to have a little exam about where did we know where all these things were. So, and we had an instruction that we had to dismember our bikes before we left them at night, just in case a paratrooper came down and could use them to move around. So,
how did you disable your bike?
Pardon?
How do you disable your bike every night?
You take the front wheel off.
Oh, I think that's fairly effective, unless you know how to ride a unicycle. Can you remember what I mean? Because you didn't have supermarkets back then, did you? You presumably
no, but we had a lovely store called Galbraith's, which when you went into it, you had the bakery counter, and then the meat counter and wholesale and things like that, and then the fishmonger and butcher. And there was a lady sat up in a glass sort of perch, and she had these wires going to these different sections.
Yeah.
And when you went and got served, they would write a note of what you'd had, and you put in your money, or you gave it to the person. They put it into this little cup, and then they pulled a string, which a spring sent it flying up to the cashier, who was sitting in this little glass office, and she'd take it out and okay it and check it and send it back with a receipt.
Wow.
That's how they used to do it in those days. That was the first, not a supermarket, but a large store. There were two large stores, a Co-op and Galbraith's. Before that, when we lived at Green Hill Road, it was a case if you went to the butcher's, and he would have hanging up on hooks, a sheep and a cow and so on, and you would say what you wanted and so on. We mainly ate mutton, which is, you don't eat it now, but it's older sheep,
Yes.
And that was the cheapest meat then. We very rarely ate beef. That was expensive. But you could get chicken.
Okay. And I guess there was a lot of potatoes and turnips and swede and cabbage.
Well, everybody had gardens and we grew our own. And in fact, that was one of the things about horses and carts. We all had buckets and a shovel. And of course, as soon as you saw a horse had dropped its manure, you went out there with your bucket quick and got it, because we used it on the garden, you see, and the manure in the garden, because there was quite a lot of it, you see.
Yes. Okay. And did you read a lot? I mean, did you have access to books? Was there a public library?
Big public library, beautiful public library. We had, it was, Paisley was the centre for liberals, Scottish liberals. There was the Coates family who owned the Coates Mills, who made silk thread. They were Coates's. And then there was the anchor mills. Between them, they had, it was something like 30,000 employees.
Yeah.
So they had stations and buses and people and mill girls coming down arm in arm down the road when the shifts changed. They did 3 shifts, 24 hours. Yeah, they were very big, and they were very good employers. My grandmother maternal grandmother was very proud of the fact that she'd gone to school because she worked there, and Coates's paid for them to have school part-time. And
did you get to go to the library to borrow books?
Borrow books, yes, you could borrow books. And a lovely museum, huge museums, and yeah.
So I was thinking, there wasn't a lot of spare money, was there? So you didn't have money for toys and things. You had to make your own entertainment, presumably.
A lot of it, but we had, because it was such a prosperous town, we had such facilities you wouldn't dream of. We had a theatre. We had 7 cinemas.
All right, yeah.
Fantastic cinemas, and often with a resident organist, because he used to come up on these electric organs. Halfway through, you'd have a sing-song with all the latest tunes, and they would put up on the screen, and everybody sang around. So it was a lovely night out. We had 7 of these. And just to give you an idea, son, this is how big the town was. It had St. James's Station, Gilmer Street, which was the big one that James led into before going to Glasgow. Then on the way up to Glasgow, there was Abercorn, and they had Fergusley, Mills, Canal Street, and Hawkhead stations, railway stations in the town. Yeah. It was a big town. It would be about 5 miles across each way.
Okay. Yeah. And what were your treats you can remember? You know, for a birthday or Christmas, perhaps. What would be the highlights of the year in terms of?
Oh, Christmas. I mean, obviously you'd have a Christmas tree, and my mother used to make steamed dumpling, and they used to put a shilling in it, and also little things in that. And also at Halloween, we used to go with get a tub out, water, and apples, you know.
Apple bobbing, yes.
Yeah. We had big Christmas do. We used to have. Parents didn't have a lot of money. I mean, I think the cost of the house was £5 a week or something like that.
Okay.
Rental.
Yes.
And I think my dad might have had, £8 a week. Yeah.
Wow.
So, but I mean, things were a farthing and a halfpenny and a penny and things like that. So you got a lot for. I mean, £1 was a huge amount of money.
Yes. Also,
we never saw people like, for example, I think it was post-war, saw a black person in Paisley.
There wasn't much.
Just from people outside, they just didn't come. I mean, it was a traveling Indian man, I remember, just before the war, came around with big cases, and he had cheap clothing that he used to sell on the doorstep. But it was very, very cut off. I mean, we looked at my my step grandmother. Her sister's son. He was a reader for Collins, the publisher. He used to read Czech books, and he'd been to London, and we thought, wow. You know, that's been to London. And that was just something like, you know.
Yeah.
We did have we had our holidays. We had lovely holidays. We used to have a holiday. We wouldn't go very far, just down the Clyde, go to Dunoon or, you know, Girvan or Saltcoats or whatever, you know. Yeah. And we very, nearly every second year, we'd go across to Kirkcaldy to my father's people over there.
Yeah.
They were in Fife, on the East Coast. But yeah, during the war, when I was, when we were all busy, I got a job as delivering milk. I was be 11 when I started. Before I did school, I used to get up 6 o'clock and go up to the dairy, and they'd put my gloves on and they'd load me up with these cans of milk. And I'd go up to school, wind up a steep hill up, delivering these and getting the empties and bring it back before school. And when I was about 12, I got an afternoon one as well. But that was with a trolley with pneumatic wheels and little bottles, third of a pint bottles. I used to deliver that to the posh people. Yeah.
Yes,
but the best people who, this is a funny thing, the people who tipped were not the wealthy ones. The wealthy ones didn't tip.
That's why
they stayed. They had all the money. That's why they kept it. They got rich because they kept it all.
Yes. So how did your father meet your mother? Because your mother was from Paisley, was she?
Yeah, she was just from round the corner in Clark Street. Yeah, and he was only about another 150 yards up the road as well. So I don't know where they actually met. I don't remember them saying where they met, but it might have been at Doby's. I don't know. My mother worked when she got a job. It was at Doby's, went straight from school, and she became the supervisor of the packing department at Doby's. And during the war, she went back to do that. So they were both working at Doby's during the war. My dad was a ARP warden for the quarter of the town, which included our side, you know, the what would be the southwest side, southeast side.
Your father would have been too old for the
but he was in the First World War, you see.
Yes.
But he thought we could. He thought he should volunteer.
Yeah.
And when he came, my mother came and she was in tears, and she came to us and said, "Your dad wants to go into the army." And of course, Betty and I just clung on to him and said, "No, Dad, you've done the first, you're doing a good job here." So he didn't go because he had 3 crying people all hanging on to him.
And he obviously, although he served in the First World War, he wasn't injured because he left the front line.
He wasn't injured. But remember, we went to France and discovered that we discovered about that uncle he had, whom we thought was a child, but was actually a 19-year-old young man who was killed in the First World War. It's St. Omer, wasn't it? Near St. Omer, he's buried. Yeah.
Yes. That was his uncle.
Yeah.
But his uncle was the same age as him then. His uncle was only 4 years older than he was.
Oh, right.
4 or 5 years, wasn't he?
Yeah, because my dad was born in 1899. He died in 1963, son. January 2nd of January 1963. That was a bitter cold, and he dropped dead with the cold and that, you know, on the station on the way back. A heart attack and died.
Yeah. And he did briefly go and work in Australia, didn't he?
Yes, he started up a new factory. A new factory. He bought and got all the equipment for it and had it all shipped out, because the latest stuff was built by a company called Moulins, Moulins. Very good machines. So he got best machines and everything. And he picked some leading hands.
Yeah.
And he flew out, did the requisition of the factory, the building. Yeah. And then when he'd got the stuff installed, they called out the others and they came. It was a great success. They were very good. They had a nice time in Australia. They lived in Melbourne and St Kilda. Yeah. But my mother missed the family too much. Yeah. And she decided after about 3 or 4 years to come back. I was all set to go out to Australia myself, but as they came back, they came back. It was only back in Paisley about a year when it was closed down. They were bought out by Godfrey Phillips and Imperial Tobacco and so on.
And is that when he moved down to Mill Hill in London?
That's right. He moved down to Mill Hill when he was appointed production director of Sobrani's. Sobrani is a deluxe cigarettes and tobacco manufacturer in the city of London, in City Road.
And who was it that gave him the desk?
Pardon?
Who gave him the desk?
Who gave him the
desk?
The desk. Oh, that was the manager, general manager of Dobies.
All right.
He was the general manager of Dobies, and he gave it to my father when he lived in Elversley. Yeah, that was a nice gift to him, wasn't it?
Do you know why he gave it to him?
Well, I don't know. I suppose he worked well with them and got, they were very good friends. Okay. But my dad was also a leading Mason. He was, in his time, he was a past Grand Master of Bishopton number 1 lodge.
In Paisley?
Pardon?
In Paisley?
That's Bishopton is just next to where I walked to with my grandfather. Oh, it's just a little place, a hamlet or a village, just to the west of Paisley. Yeah.
Oh, what made you decide to go to the sea? What was it? You didn't want to work at the docks, or was it a dream of travel, or?
Well, Kirkcaldy, of course, I was always down at the docks there because Kirkcaldy had it was known in Britain as the place for linoleum. People used to put, people who weren't wealthy used to put linoleum on the floors. And that was where Cairns, the linoleum factory, was. And that brought cork from Portugal and Spain in coastal vessels into the harbour at Kirkcaldy. Oh. And linseed oil was the other main product of it. But so the docks were down at the bottom, whereas Kirkcaldy was up a steep hill.
Yeah.
And in those days, they had these horses, and to go up a hill, what they would do is put 2 horses in line with chains on them and hook them onto the front of the shafts and just get the 3 horses pulling them up the hill. When they came back down, the horse would go down, but you used to put a metal sleeve under the wheels, so it just skidded down over the cobbles.
Okay. And did you see that when you just visited Kirkcaldy, or did you ever live there?
Yeah, it's dead now. Of course, the whole unfortunately Kirkcaldy hasn't got it, and Paisley hasn't got its mills. They've all closed down. In fact, the population's dropped from about 90,000 when I was there to about 70,000 now.
Okay. I don't know if making linoleum was it dangerous, because you've got linseed oil can combust quite easily, can't it? And
I don't know what the process was, son, but I know that was used in the process somehow.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Shall we end this session here? I don't know how we stop the recording. Perhaps we have to get my brother back.
We just say to Graham, thanks again for hosting us, pal. That's very kind of you. Nice to have a little chat.
Nice
Are you okay?
I hear the stories. I was
Oh, you're there.
Some paperwork.
Oh, you're there. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We're now, yes.
Oh. I had my dinner while you were talking. Also done some paperwork. But it's nice having the Reddie TV channel on.
Oh, have you watched the Bald Explorer on YouTube?
Have you got what?
There's something called the Bald Explorer on YouTube, and it's a chap who's walked along. He's done he's doing the coast. But I was watching him do the Feltham. He was walking through Feltham, looking at the houses.
Oh.
I suppose it's a bit like Reddie channel. It was a Feltham channel. His comment upset a lot of people in Middleton and Elmer, because as he was trying to walk along the beach, he said all the estates are all private, no parking, no entry. And he said it just estate after estate. This feels very, very unfriendly down here. Which apparently upset a lot of people. Well, thank you very much. I better go and get my tea.
Yeah. Well, Carol's bringing my dinner up.
Oh, you've got it sorted. Well done.
Yeah. But I've got so I'm doing a trial with Ancestry.com, a 14-day free trial, but it's quite good. The funny thing is that I've come back up to about 1809 and come in, dear, but come up to something which is very odd, that someone else is claiming that it was their relative that married Helen Gibson, where I'm sure I've got it from parish records that it was William Reddie and not David Reddie. So that's something, with Ancestry, it sometimes comes up. If you put a name in and a date, it says, is this the one? And they already have records, matched it up automatically.
Yeah.
So it suggests someone, but it looks exactly the same. It's when you go back there, it's about this William Reddie, who was born about 1809, but ended up dead in Australia. I didn't know he'd got. I just knew he had died, but it died in Australia in 1833 or something like that. So that's very interesting. But there's another person claims that is theirs, and Helen Gibson married David Reddie, R-E-A-D-Y. She can't have married both of them unless she's a bigamist. So I've got to look that up.
Did you say he was born in 1809 and he died in 1833? Oh, he's gone. Well, he was 24 when he died?
Well, he's quite young, yes. Yeah.
But he wouldn't have had any children, would he, then?
Anyway, I've only just started, so it's only this afternoon, so I'll look into it and sort it out. Yeah, but
sort it out.
Obviously, I mean, what you can do, once I've got everything up onto it, I'll just let you have my laptop, and you can
just log in. You wouldn't have to have your laptop.
Pardon?
You wouldn't need the laptop. You just log in, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Don't need your laptop.
Oh, you can log into mine if I give you the password and that.
It's just hosted on Ancestry, I think. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Righto. So I've just got to spend a bit of time, getting it on. Okay.
All right.
Anyway, thanks a lot, pal.
He's got some cooking to do now, Graham. He's got to cook some cakes.
Oh.
He can't talk anymore.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, see you later.
Bye. Bye. Bye.